This surgeon takes lives instead of saving them. We open with the cop hurriedly driving his partner to the hospital. Once there, Dr. Paul Kersey tends to the fallen officer. Unfortunately, there isn't much he can do. Diagnosis? Death. The partner feels guilty, but he did all that he could. A nurse calls out to Paul. He needs to work on the shooter now. As he walks off, the officer shouts, "So you're gonna go save that monster now?" Yes, he will. At home, Paul has a look at his broken watch while chatting with his wife Lucy. Then, they hear an excited screech upstairs from their daughter, Jordan. Perhaps she has a boy over. She comes down acting all calm and cool, then bursts with joy. She got accepted to her dream college. They're so proud of her. Later, they attend Jordan's soccer game where one of the parents is acting a little uppity. He starts shouting at the ref and cursing excessively. Paul tells him to calm down and prescribes a chill pill. The man counters, wanting to prescribe his fists. It almost breaks out into a fight, but Lucy steps in, protecting the timid Paul. After, the Kerseys go out for lunch. They're all excited for Jordan to start college. However, Paul's brother, Frank, suggests she picks up some martial arts skills to fight off any creepy boys, aka beta males. Suddenly, she breaks out her moves. She chokes Frank, and he's into it, meaning he admires her skills. She's actually been training Krav Maga on a weekly basis. Very cool. Outside the restaurant, Frank asks Paul for $2,000 to pay off some debts. In the past, he was convicted of a crime, making employment difficult. As the good brother he is, Paul accepts. Then, the valet comes and Frank jokes that Paul's the man with all the cash. While just a passing joke for Frank, the valet takes it to heart and inspects Paul and his family. This guy seems like he's got money and a happy life. Time to ruin it. The man, Miguel, pulls up Paul's address in his car and snaps a pic with his phone. Oh, also, he's got his initials tattooed on his arm, a detail to remember. Sometime later, the fam prepares to go out to celebrate Jordan's birthday. However, Paul gets a call. He's got to come into work. It's sad, but they understand. The ladies cheer themselves up by shopping. Lucy plans to cheer Jordan up with a homemade cake. But first, she needs her iPad. Jordan heads up to get it, but it's not in its usual spot. Then, Lucy notices one of the windows are open. Her suspicions begin to escalate as she spots dirty footsteps in the house. Suddenly, Jordan screams. The full reality of the situation quickly sets in. 3 creepy masked men have broken in, and they take the ladies hostage. The leader, Knox, has Lucy direct him to the safe, while Jordan is left with Joe and Fish. Lucy has difficulty opening their safe under pressure while Jordan gets all kinds of creepy vibes from Fish. His partner tells him to stop goofing around, and they begin to argue. Jordan capitalizes on the moment and attacks with a knife. Lucy runs down soon after and throws boiling water on Fish. A meal's gotta cook. In retaliation, the men open fire. At the hospital, Paul is alerted of 2 new victims. When he goes to check on them, he's stopped, but realizes what that must mean. He runs over to Lucy and finds that she's come down with a severe case of not being alive. As far as Jordan, she's in a coma. Paul later meets with some detectives, Kevin Raines and Leonore Jackson, who launch an investigation into Lucy's murder. Come on, man. Paul attends Lucy's funeral with her family. After the service, Paul rides with Lucy's father when suddenly he stops and hops out of the car. He noticed some poachers in the area and they clapped his deer. Lucy's father grabs his rifle and shoots after the men, but they get away. Paul is shook. The gun-wielding alpha male explains that sometimes you gotta take the law into your own hands to defend what's yours. In the aftermath of all this, Paul is having trouble sleeping, so he goes to therapy. She helps him work through his trauma and offers some tips on getting a good night's sleep. No minute movies before bed. He understands that recovery is a process, but isn't sure what the end goal is. His wife is gone, his daughter is comatose, and he feels like he failed. He wasn't there to protect them when they needed him most. Later, Paul checks in with the police department about his case. Luckily, he arrives just as Kevin is getting water and gets buzzed in without an appointment. Kevin has a wall full of sticky notes, open cases left unanswered for months. Despite this, Kevin assures Paul his case is different since it wasn't gang-related. As you must know, gangs live by the ancient Chinese proverb, snitches get stitches. Kevin implores Paul to have faith and wait, but this just makes Paul feel even more powerless. At night, he decides to go for a walk when he notices 2 thugs harassing a woman. He intervenes, which stops the men from hurting her, but they turn their attention to him instead. They beat him up pretty badly before leaving him lying on the street. During his recovery period, Paul sees an ad on TV for a gun store and he takes an interest in purchasing a weapon. He goes to the store and speaks to Bethany, who explains the process of getting a gun in America. Basically, if you have a pulse, you're good to go. Though he takes note of all the security cameras and the fact that the gun and its bullets will be traceable back to him, and decides against buying one. Another day at the hospital, another gunshot victim. But this time, the thug drops a Glock. Paul quickly kicks it under the bed. He somehow manages to bring it home undetected and proceeds to learn how it works. Ha, I think you just pulled the trigger, dummy. We proceed with a training montage overlaid with his day job. You see, in the day he saves lives, and at night he's preparing to take them. One night, he checks up on Jordan and finds that her condition has worsened. She's having seizures now. As a precaution, she's been strapped to the bed. Paul notes the irony. His daughter is essentially handcuffed while the animals that did this to her are free, living their best lives. It's time to act up. Paul dons a hoodie and heads out, looking for trouble. Soon, he sees a carjacking take place as two thugs assault a man and take his girlfriend in their car. Paul shouts out and they immediately respond with bullets. He shoots back at the car, causing it to crash. Then, the kickback of the gun slide cuts his hand. All the meanwhile, someone is recording him. This is sure to be a viral hit. One of the carjackers stumbles out of the car and begins firing sporadically. Paul waits for the perfect shot, then pops him. He walks over, looms over him, and puts him down for good. Then Paul walks to the car and checks on the driver. He's fine, just sleeping. The detectives arrive on the scene hours later. After speaking to the witness who recorded the incident, they learn that the video was, in fact, a viral hit. At home, Paul sees his handiwork for himself, and he's loving it. The next day while driving to work, Paul tunes into the radio. They're all talking about his heroic vigilante ways. They even dub him the Grim Reaper. At work, Paul tends to a boy who was shot in the leg. He tells Paul that the so-called ice cream man did this to him because he didn't want to sell. And he ain't talking about delicious cold treats. Paul checks the boy's address, then assures him that everything is gonna be fine. True to his word, Paul pulls up to the turf while Chief Keef is bopping in the background. Bang bang. Paul finds the street name and then goes to find the ice cream man. He introduces himself as his last customer before dumping his load all over the man's chest. The reaction following this is mixed. Some think vigilantes are cringe, while others think it's based. Kevin and his partner arrive on the scene and spot some kids reenacting the scene. Kevin notes that the boy is shooting with his left hand. Interesting. He reviews the Reaper's footage and finds that the mystery man is indeed left-handed. Back at work, another gunshot victim is brought in, and this time it's Miguel, whom Paul recognizes from his tattoo. While Paul uses a defibrillator on him, he notices a rather familiar watch. It's his. What time is it? Snooping time. Paul takes Miguel's phone from the ambulance and unlocks it with his thumb. Inside, he finds the picture of his address on the phone. He also goes through his contacts and finds that all the stolen items from the safe are being sold at a pawn shop. So, Paul pays a visit and speaks to the owner, Ponytail. He name drops Miguel, leading Ponytail to get suspicious. As he circles around Paul, he notices that his hoodie has a morgue tag on it. Uh-oh. Ponytail casually texts Fish, alerting him to the doctor's surprise visit. Paul asks him if he's got any watches. Ponytail says yes. He goes to reach for an oddly gun-shaped one. Then Paul attacks, stabbing his hand. He forces him to take him to his belongings. He takes Paul to the back to find his stuff, but moments later, Fish shows up and attempts to shoot Paul. But he pops Ponytail instead. Certified bruh moment. Paul and Fish exchange gunfire, but then Paul's gun jams. Fortunately, Fish slips on some water, and Paul feels a sudden musical inspiration. Yeah, it even struck a chord with Fish. Fish flees, but just as he's about to taste freedom, Paul manages to tag his leg. He's probably thinking, darn, the hitboxes in this game are way too big. Fish tries to weasel his way out of Paul's wrath by giving up Joe, who he reveals works at a local auto shop. Suddenly, Fish attacks. Paul is stunned and accidentally fires a shot off. The bullet hits a bowling ball, which begins to roll. Fish closes in, but as fate would have it, he gets bonked. Beautiful. Paul is sure to collect the hard drives before fleeing the scenes. At home, he watches a tutorial on how to destroy the data inside. This was before YouTube removed dislikes, so he's certain it's a good tutorial. After, the media frenzy continues. Now, there's even memes of the Reaper. Nice meme. At work, Paul gets a visit from the detectives. There's been a break in the case. A man named Fish got fried, and they found the pawn shop with all his stuff. Of course, he already knows all this, but acts surprised anyway. You'd think Kevin could spot when someone has a dark alter ego by now, right? 'Cause Breaking Bad. After, Paul goes to the garage where Joe works. Joe rudely tells Paul he's closed, so Paul grabs a wrench and hits his off button. Paul then places Joe under the car, which is being propped up by a crowbar. He puts his surgeon expertise to good use, and Joe is soon giving up answers. He reveals that Knox was the mastermind behind the whole thing, but he isn't someone who is easily found. Apparently, he finds you. With all the information he needs, Paul delivers a sick one-liner. That was off the chain, yo. he says before yanking the chain and condemning Joe to a car coffin. Meanwhile, the detectives pay Frank a visit. They think he's the Reaper. He's left-handed, has motive, and not such a clean record. We cut to Paul chilling with Jordan. As usual, she's not very talkative. He receives a text. An unknown number is threatening to reveal the truth about him. The phone rings. It's Knox. He invites Paul to meet him at a club, but not so they can dance. Fearing for his brother, Frank checks in on Paul, but he doesn't seem to be home. Frank lets himself in and stumbles upon Paul's mess of a basement. He spots bullets and realizes what's really going on. Back to Paul, he arrives at the club and is told to meet at the bathroom. Inside, he calls the phone and takes aim. He unloads while everyone else runs away in fear. The stall opens. It's empty. Suddenly, Knox appears from behind, firing away. Protected by a human shield. Paul takes cover, but doesn't fire back, fearing for the innocent. Using his 200 IQ, he spots an electrical box and shoots it out. In the cover of darkness, Paul flees. In the aftermath, Knox ends up in the hospital and the detectives arrive to question him. He says he knows who the shooter was. Before he reveals the name, we cut back to Paul, dealing with his own injuries. Through sheer will, he manages to patch up his own wound. Meanwhile, the detectives burst into Paul's empty office. Paul is in fact headed towards his basement where he runs into Frank. The pair have a heart-to-heart. Of course, Frank wants him to put an end to it all and focus on doing what's best for Jordan. Then, the popo come knocking. Frank answers the door and makes up an alibi for Paul. They have no choice but to leave. Back in the basement, the brothers continue to chat when Paul receives a call. Jordan woke up. Finally. Paul rushes over and unfortunately has to break the news about her mother. On the bright side, Jordan is physically well and can come home soon. Fast forward a week and the pair head for the elevator. Just as the door is about to close, Knox enters. He knows exactly who they are, but Paul doesn't. He never saw his face. He makes small talk with Jordan, then calls Paul by name as they leave. Uh-oh. Immediately after, Paul visits Bethany to fulfill his American freedoms. After Jordan returns home, Knox returns to the house with two other goons. Jordan hides in the closet as Paul deals with them. He pops the two goons using his super stealth skills. But Knox is nowhere to be found. Paul checks the basement, then gets surprise attacked. Knox savors the moment while Jordan panics. She pops out of her hiding spot and runs over. Knox gets distracted and Paul seizes the moment. He opens a nifty compartment under a table to pull out a huge gun and pump Knox full of lead. After, the detectives arrive on the scene. Kevin talks to Paul about what happened, questioning him about the guns. Although Paul's story is clearly suspicious, Kevin decides to make up a story that Knox returned because he thought Jordan would identify him. Later on, Paul drops Jordan off at college. On his way out, he notices a man who just committed a robbery. He calls to the man and pretends to shoot him with his finger. Moral of the story? You can save lives by taking them.